Where are we? Okay, so for those on the phone in the room, we're going to jump into a couple last pieces in Decision Lens. I just want to reiterate a couple things we went over today. One is we're going through a lot of information very fast, and it's pruned down to give you just some basics. But myself, the team at Decision Lens, we are available to you at no cost to you to help you. Yeah, right. We have a queue system as well. No. We're here to help you as well. The TPP team is up to speed on most of this, a lot of this. They're here to help you. And when you actually start going through a prioritization and building a portfolio, there are going to be a lot of things that you don't remember, forget, just need help with in general. I do want to point you to the Learn section again at the top right of where you can go to DLU to get helpful things on basically every function of Decision Lens. The support link where you can go and get support for Decision Lens if you can't figure out something or you need help or something's not working or you find a bug. I don't think Sanjay's number is on the contact list, but you can contact support and it'll eventually make its way somewhere to give you that kind of support that you need. But with that being said, let's jump back into your portfolio. So I'm going to jump into my portfolio that I created today, and I want to show you where the priorities that we went through come into play. So from your portfolio, go to Sensitivity Analysis, and in the Sensitivity Analysis screen, you will probably see something that looks like this. And the one thing I want to point out at the beginning is that all of your weights are equal for the criteria that you have. Now, I have an extra criterion in here, the percent funded, because of the exercise we went through in the morning, or earlier. So if you don't have that, that's probably why. The weights are set up to be equal because on the left-hand side under weight inputs, the default is all participant weightings. This means if you go through the pairwise process in the actual portfolio, the all participant weighting is going to be the result of everyone's participation. And by default, that's what these weights are going to be set up as. Because this is a new portfolio that was generated, there are no weights. We didn't go through the weights in this particular one, so they're all equal. But with that being said, below the all participant weightings, you do have one custom priority set. So if you click on custom priority set, you'll see here that you have one called TXDOT. I want you to go ahead and click on that. And what this is going to do is it's going to wind the weights to what the TXDOT administration came up to for the UTP last year when they went through this process. This is to give you an example of what they could be if you want to use these or if you want to just understand what the UTP weights were from last year for the projects that you have. Now, when you make that change, you'll see that the weights change, but also you have a change column. What the change column means, and it's this one right here, if you can see that. As you make a change to the weights, the change column shows up and it tells you how did this project move. For instance, this project at the top moved up 3 places because I changed the weights from all being equal to the TXDOT priorities. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're following along and you clicked on the TXDOT and it's now set at these, at the top right I want you to click the Set as Current. It's the orange button. And what this does is it resets the weights that are here right now as the default. This is your new baseline. And the reason I want you to do this is because the next thing I want you to do is actually to go through and actually change these weights on your own to something that you think would be more closely related to what you would pick or what your district would pick or your MPO. So the way that you can manually change these weights is by using the sliders here. So each weight has a slider on it. So if I wanted safety to be higher, I could move safety up. I could also type in the percentage that I want in the box. So if I move safety up, it moves everything else down, but it keeps their proportions to what they were before. So I'm going to move safety up, and then I'm going to click on this little lock icon on the right. This way, it's the icon to the right of the slider. This way, when I move the next slider, that one doesn't change. That make sense? Okay. So I want you to make a couple of adjustments. I'm going to change safety up. I'm also going to put congestion reduction up as well, because I think that's important. And I think I'm good, just like that. So I made 2 changes on mine. When you make changes on yours, you'll see that change column show up. And the use that I see for this is you get into a setting where you collect everyone's priorities. You have a grouped set of priorities, right? You get into a meeting where you have 100 projects that you're reviewing, and someone raises their hand and this says, yes, but I think safety should be way more important than what the group thought. And you go, that's very interesting. Let's see how that plays out. And let me wind up safety, and let me wind up congestion reduction. And I can tell you that the top 4 projects are still the top 4 projects from what they were before. They didn't change. And all of the other projects, they moved up by 1 or 3 points or places, but it really wasn't that drastic. Therefore, the top 4 projects aren't susceptible to safety's weight in our model. So the point that the person was making, although a valid one, doesn't really change the ranking of your top projects. Now, you could try to game this and figure out what the project is that that person wants to move up and figure out which weights to move where, but you could see that it now becomes a transparent process that you'd have to really do some manipulation to make that happen. So with my change here, yes?
So I just with environmental all the way over 100%, my scores all values were all 0.
Yeah, so the question was he put environment all the way to 100%, and all of his values for his projects were 0. That means that none of your projects scored on impacts to the environment. Therefore, even though it's 100%, no projects received any values. So in that case, that would be a good reason why you would remove that criterion from your model, because it doesn't have an impact. Yes. For the case in your project, yeah. So, orange.
Is that how we capture the environmental information?
The environmental, do you recall?
The environment?
There are projects with scores for effects on the environment, but in this case we didn't have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a difficult measure to come up with, and what we ended up with is a couple of things, including whether it has category 4 on it or whether it has one of the environmental project classifications. But as far as really getting into the details of what we're doing to affect the environment, we haven't come up with something great for that category.
Okay. So from the changes that you made on the slider, at the bottom right, I want you to click the orange button that says Save New. And I want you to give it a name. I'm going to call it In-Room 2/15/2018. And the reason I'm doing this is because I made a change. Maybe this was based on one person's recommendation of priorities, and I want to make sure I save that and capture it. I can go back to it later. So it shows up under Custom Priority Set. I'm going to revert back to TXDOT because that was my baseline, just to leave it. So from the sensitivity analysis, there's a lot of analysis that you can do. I will point out that you can export these results to Excel if you ever needed to use it for something. I want to point out the alternative categories because we talked about that earlier. This is where you could filter projects, the results of your project. So if you had a list of 500 projects and you wanted to show specific projects based on the county or the district or the type of project, and you had those as categories, in this section, you could actually filter them out. So if I wanted to just look at Hayes County projects, there are 2. Or use that in however way you'd like. You can also add a piece of data to your graph. A lot of times people like to use the graph actually as a screenshot, putting it in presentations, and you can add a column of data at the top right here. So if you click on Add Column of Data, you can actually choose from any categories that you have. You could choose from any of the metrics that you have, if you wanted to look at like base ADT and project class, and you can add those into your results. And this way, if you wanted to sort these by which affect the most cars, your highest ADT to the lowest ADT, and look at the relative scores, you could do that. So you could sort and filter the data however you need to, and this is where the data comes into play. Again, the alternative categories come into play, and you could do different activities like that. This becomes very powerful and a lot of times used quite a bit. So, sensitivity analysis, very, very powerful, just touching on it. It helps to know kind of what you want to show to your stakeholders or how you want to communicate, and that helps you set this up. All right. So there's going to be three more things I'm going to go through today. The first one I just want you to look at because I'm not going to go through it. It really warrants a whole session in and of itself, and that's the allocate page. And you can go ahead and click on allocate, bring it up, and I'm going to show you what's here because it's important that we go through this. So the allocate page is where all of the cost comes into play. This is where you build a scenario of what projects you want to fund. In this case, in the example for this training, we have 3 resource pools, Category 1, Category 6, Category 8. This is where you could add resource pools, and that question came up earlier. I forgot who, was it you? Maybe. Someone asked about Category 1 federal, Category 1 state. It was yours, right? Okay. This is where you can add a resource pool if it doesn't show up. By default from PMDIS, it will have every resource pool available, even ones that are not being used. But this is where one thing that PMDIS does not fill in for you, which is your budget. So this top section is your budget, and when you generate a portfolio, the budget section will be completely blank because I don't think the budgets are known. However, all of the project costs are known, and those will show up at the bottom. Now, in this case, I have 3 different resource pools or types of funding, and I can expand any given project to see which resource it's asking money for and which year. So in this case, this project is asking for Category 6 funding in 2018. Now, as you build out scenarios, and you can build out multiple scenarios, you can change funding, you can change project costs, you can add dependencies. This is dependencies right here as it exists today. Not as robust as what we talked about at the very beginning, but there is functionality here. When you build out a scenario, typically you would identify budgets, funding, costs, things like that, dependencies. And there are different ways to go about funding the projects. Decision Lens has an algorithm that can suggest projects to you based on the value of the project and the cost, so it does a value-cost analysis. You can do that as a baseline. You could specifically identify projects that you want to fund. You could do a mixture of those things. Say, I want to fund these 10 projects, but then the rest of it, what's the best value that I can get? And you can build multiple scenarios off of that. Yes?
At what point, so you're saying that project's asking for X amount of dollars of CAPSIT. When was that in one of the data sets?
Yeah, so in...
And someone would have had to already identify what category of funding that project needed?
I'm pointing at Ben.
That's in DCIS.
Well, what about projects that haven't been funded yet?
Then you don't have anything on the T2 screen?
They're in development authority.
Then you're going to have to identify that in PMDIS. If you needed to go to a category in here, then you're going to need to tell PMDIS what category that should be.
Okay.
And you can edit the funding information in there.
Okay.
Yeah. You could also edit in here if you get to this point and you kind of, didn't see it. I could say that this is actually, category 1, and it's going to cost $100. It's not going to cost $55,000 anymore. So $100 in 2019 of category 1 funding. We're done. That project's getting funded. So you can make adjustments here as well. So the idea here is that, and I'm not going to go through there's a lot of pieces to this, the forced funding, unfunding, dependencies. I just will say that when you get to this point, definitely reach out to us as a resource or DLU online to go through the pieces of how to use this, because what this does is you will use this to identify which projects you want to fund with your amount. Because if you had enough budget to fund all your projects, you wouldn't need this tool. But unfortunately, we don't live in that type of environment, and you are constrained by a budget. Once you identify a scenario, multiple scenarios that maybe have different budgets or fund different projects, you can analyze those further. And that's what I'm going to show you. We're going to kind of skip over the building of a scenario, assume we have one. In your portfolio, in this portfolio, you actually have a couple of scenarios that you can choose from at the top. Baseline, constrained, a constrained with an increased budget, things like that. But the reason that this becomes important is because once you identify which projects are being funded, you can then analyze the results of those projects and do target setting. So for instance, the first thing I'm going to point to is the metrics page. On the metrics page, I can identify which metrics I want to focus on. So for instance, deck areas receiving preventative maintenance. So this would be square feet. So based on the scenario, because remember, scenarios can be different projects that are being funded. So based on the scenario that I was working on and this particular metric, I can see that I am going to be doing preventative maintenance on 720,000 square feet of deck area for bridges. And the majority of that is going to be seen in 2019, 2020, and I can actually sort the project list at the bottom to see which projects are actually contributing to that. One gotcha on this screen that I will call out is that some of you may be wondering, I know I am, why are you showing 2018 when my scenario starts in 2019? That's because in Decision Lens, we look at the year after the project is being funded for when you're going to be receiving that benefit. So for instance, the project is being funded in a specific year, and the benefit will be seen the next year because it's being built during that year. But with that being said, you can pull up a metric, individual metrics, and understand which projects are contributing to that. The reduction in the deficiency bridge is a good one that I always pull up, as well as the impact on total crashes. So if I were to pull up total crashes, during this planning period, we can expect that almost 36 crashes are going to be reduced based on the projects that are being funded, and the projects that are contributing to that are 2 projects. Not that many, but I can say that these are the 2 projects that are going to be doing that. So if there was a question on a specific metric and you want to talk about it and you want to know which projects are contributing to that, I can pull that up here because it's only showing me the funded projects, not the unfunded projects. Metrics becomes pretty important when you're doing that target setting, when you want to understand the impact of a portfolio or of a scenario that you're building. The other piece that I wanted to show you is the scenario overview. So on the scenario overview page, it's a more simplified view of the allocate. So the allocate screen is where you would build your scenario, do your cost, do your dependencies, all of that. But if you really want to just communicate which projects are being completed, you can do that here. I can say that 28 projects are being funded for $42 million. 9 projects are not being funded. I can also group this by a category. So if I want to group this by county, I could show that four projects from this county are being funded and 5 projects are not being funded. If I wanted to break that up and be able to communicate that a little bit better. And the other thing we can do here is when we review this set of projects that are being funded, is I can look at a Gantt chart view to see actually when these are being slated to begin. So I have projects that are starting in 2018, 2019, 2020, so on and so forth. This is where if you had multiple scenarios, you can actually compare the scenarios and see, based on maybe I changed funding, maybe I changed the year that projects are going to start, where those projects are being affected, which ones maybe aren't being funded or are being funded. Yes? Sorry, I wasn't looking up.
I guess something that, this may be like really sophisticated, but I at least would like to put it out there. Maybe Ben will be like, if you had to identify the category before you even run how your budget's going to get allocated, I mean, I would think that at least part of the idea is you would say this project is eligible for these 4 categories of funding, and I need a total of $20 million. And you could run, this would run its magic, and it would tell you you can put $5 million of this and $6 million of that, and and come up with the best way to use multiple funding sources to do more things and kind of.
There is a way to do that in decision lens, and I think Eric can probably talk about funding scenarios for a project, right?
Yeah.
You choose different categories for different scenarios.
Well, I'm saying like from the beginning, but part of this was like this is asking for this much Cat 6. So what if that project was also eligible for 3 other types of funding?
And that's
it wouldn't even get.
Yeah. So that's something that we've referred to as fungible pools.
Okay.
Where meaning a project could pull from multiple pools of funding. That's not something that we can do as dynamically as that in Decision Lens yet. It's something we're looking into that has been talked about.
Okay.
However, I will say that if you have a specific case where a project is eligible for funding from this pool or this pool, there is a way that we could do an either or. So if you knew that this project needed $50,000 and it could get it from Category 1 or Category 6 or Category 8, we can manually add those in as options for a project.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. We call it cost profiles, where you could build different cost profile options for a project. But by default, from PMDIS, everything is built with a single cost profile of that amount for that category.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, I mean, y'all are continuously kind of refining, and so I'm just saying, for future reference, to really stretch that out and not have to have it be so.
Right.
You have to go into it kind of knowing.
Yeah.
That.
There are some pieces that I didn't go into. One thing that's kind of it's a different angle on that, which we call sequencing. So right now, when you create a scenario, a lot of times you're asking for a certain amount of money from a certain pool at a certain year. You can turn on sequencing for projects, and what that means is you can run the optimizer in Decision Lens, and it would allow that project to move years based on where funding is available. So you might have originally asked for it in 2019, but maybe there isn't funding until 2020. It wouldn't have been funded in 2019 because it's not rated as high or for whatever reason, but you could fund it with available funds later, and it allows it to move out like that. So there are different tools in Decision Lens that you could use.
Just kind of work around.
Yeah, just different ways to approach the problem. So.
Does that sequencing, no, go ahead. Does that sequencing take into account maybe optimizing your entry costs?
Yes. So when you do the allocation, if you're asking Decision Lens to allocate and show you like what's best bang for my buck for my projects, which set of projects makes the most sense, and you turn sequencing on, it would also move projects around as well. Yeah. So. Yes,
When
question?
you click on Pareto chart.
Oh, man. Just kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
So the question was the Pareto chart. Yes. What's your question? It's
When you look at the criteria tree, it's retaining the original percentages. The top one? Mine's still showing like 16.66%.
Yeah. So good question. The question was, why does the criteria tree show the original equal weights, right? When you set up a scenario in allocation, because the Pareto chart and the metrics and everything else is asking which scenario do you want to show this for.
Right.
When you build a scenario in allocation, you can identify which weight set you want to use. I didn't change it for the scenario, for the weights. I didn't change the weights for this model. But if I wanted to, for instance, in this scenario, scenario 4, I could choose the custom priority set called in-room, and that would allow those weights to be used going forward for this scenario. By default, it's going to pull from the participant group. So whatever a group of people weighted, that would be the default. If you wanted to set a custom one, you would just identify that custom one as you're building out your scenario. Yeah, good question though. Okay. So this was a lot, I know. And I know if I keep going, it's just going to be piling more on top of it. I want to restate a couple of things we went through today. So the PMDIS tool is pulling all the data from your source systems. The first presentation this morning by Kevin went through all of the calculations and how we're taking all that source data and actually giving scores or predicted values and how that's seen in Decision Lens. I promised you it would all come together kind of at the end. So they do all tie in together, and we just had to go through it step by step. And hopefully it kind of made sense at the end. You saw the picture. But as you start using this, you are going to have questions. And I want to remind you that you have in your packet, for people in the room, tips and tricks, quick start guide. You have the weights. You have the criteria list here. I mean, a couple pieces you can pull off of. This page, the community page that we went through at the very beginning, does have a lot of links on it, a lot of resources. Again, starting tomorrow, the key links at the top right, or whenever Robert sends out the email, you'll be able to start accessing production PMDIS, production decision lens, things like that. PMDIS links are here for videos. Again, there's a really detailed FAQ that came up from 3 training sessions. We basically combined them all together. And then today's presentation, which I tried not to go into, because basically it goes through like all of the stuff that we went through today. It talks about all the screens and how you would use them and best practices and things like that. So if you need some additional reading material, you can go to the community page and look at the training resources and download those as well. So with that, I want everyone to go to the community page one last time for 3 reasons. First, I want to point out that the link to Learn, or DLU, is at the top right, like it is in Decision Lens. The second reason is because there's a support link as well, where you can submit a ticket if you have a problem, or if you get locked out or something like that. And the third reason, if you scroll all the way down to on the right-hand side of the menu, at the very, very bottom of training links, I want you to click on the link that says, click here to take a post-training survey. I'm cornering you, I know. This is a very short survey. It asks you about today's training. It asks you about all the information you went through. And the TPP team and the TXDOT executives, we've been reporting back on how these trainings are going, and we really value your feedback. So if you could take a few minutes to do that, I'd appreciate it. And with that, Robert, did you have any closing remarks?
No, I did want to kind of go back to the question, Megan's question. To the funding, that's a great question. I mean, you know, obviously that's, you know.
I mean, it was, how often are we using really flexible funding on projects that use really restricted the funding on.
Right.
And then use that flexible funding to
Elsewhere,
do something else.
do something better or
And-
more with, right.
And so I'm just thinking that this is the beginning of obviously like a great path forward, but that path needs to head down.
No, you're absolutely right, and just in talking with Ben, there's gonna be some options, I think, that we can introduce
Yeah.
that will address that exact issue. I mean, there's gonna be some discussions that need to take place, higher level discussions with admin, or kind of sort of admin, to make sure that it's okay to implement some of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do have, I mean, just what he was showing me, I think there's some possibilities to be able to address that and be able to get to what we need to be. But you're absolutely right, without that, it
And like
kind
where
of
the
cripples us.
rubber meets the road when we program these projects, we have like an apportionment code, and so I know that like we try to drop that distinction between federal and state money and all of
Right.
that sort of thing, but there are restrictions.
Absolutely, they are, yeah, yeah.
And if you could just figure out a way to factor in a project's eligibility,
Right.
this project's eligible for these funds and we know that.
Some flexibility, right.
And then
yeah.
you wouldn't get in a situation like we have where funds have actually been programmed on a project that they weren't eligible for, and we had to find other funds to do that project.
Right.
And so.
Regardless of how finance actually pays the bills, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes they get, and she can actually, draw blank, but, they actually pay the bills with the oldest money that need to be paid out first, right?
Right.
And regardless sometimes, but that's regardless of what we're doing, we want to make sure that at least we have it in our process correct,
Yeah.
or the best way possible. So you're absolutely right. I just wanted to add too that for the folks that may be needing a letter for, non-BCC, we do have that, and just let us know, just email me if you need that letter. A lot of districts sometimes require that, to be able to travel, so we do have that. And then also, at some point here, probably in the next few days, we'll work on getting certificates out to y'all for those that are engineers that need the credits, or just to have, something to show that y'all participated in the class and show that y'all, get some credit for it. So we will send that out. Susan handles that for us, but we'll make sure that we get that out to you as quickly as possible. But other than that, are there any questions? Any questions online or any questions in the room that as you have these guys here, by all means, take advantage of it. So I'm gonna look to see if,
I didn't see any the last time I looked.
no, okay. And again, we've been recording these, so we'll convert these and be able and load them to the community webpage. So this way, if y'all need a reference back to that, and it'll be there, probably sometime early next week.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it takes a little bit to do that, so we'll try to get that as soon as possible. So, if there aren't any other questions, have they completed the survey?
Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you learned some things, and reach out to us. I know that some of you talked to us at the break, so you do have our contact information in the handout on the website, and I sent everyone an email, so you have my email address too. And thanks for your time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone on the phone.